Welcome, everybody. We're going to speak with Jennifer Finlayson-fife again. Most of you who know me also know her, so we're thrilled to speak again. Welcome and thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, first of all, I want to also give a thank you from myself, but from many of my clients for working on this course for the husbands, for the
Mm,
men. And I know you've done a lot of work around that. And I would just want to give you a moment to speak to that or tell me
mhm.
what you think we should know about your men's course.
Sure. Yeah, so that's the course called The Art of Loving, and, yeah, it's a good course. I mean, what it really is, my when I first started doing my work, I was very focused on women's sexuality. That's what I wrote my dissertation on, and dealing with a lot of clients who had issues around low desire and low comfort with sexuality and seeing themselves as sexual beings, as women. But I also then started to see, men have a lot of anxiety about sexuality too. Now, they may be often the higher desire people, obviously not always. And in fact, often men are not the high desire people. But, we have a cultural stereotype that can often make us blind to the questions, challenges, self-doubt that men are often carrying. And so the more that I delved into that, the more I could see how much there is a shared uncertainty around both intimacy, desire, sexuality. It might get expressed differently between men and women, but nonetheless, often men and women are grappling with very similar challenges. And so the men's course is really similar to the women's course. That's the art of desire. I'm helping both the issues of self development because it shapes so much how much we tolerate intimacy and connection, how capable we are of desire. So, I make a distinction sometimes between wanting and desiring. Wanting is the absence of something, and you want someone to come and fill you and make you feel sufficient. So, it doesn't take strength to want sexual connection, but to desire another person and to be capable of intimacy with another person requires strength within us, a strength of a sense of self that often we don't have and don't realize it. Now, the low desire spouse may know that it's not there. They may feel this person just wants validation or wants to feel good about themselves. They don't necessarily desire me as a person. And then it's harder to actually desire that kind of sex. Um, so anyway, so that's my long way of saying the men's course is helping men to look at who they are, how they've been in relationship to themselves, to their partner, and to sexuality, and how that may be impacting the level of intimacy and passion that's in the marriage, and then what they can do about it.
I love it. It's beautiful. And I'll just give a personal plug. So I work mostly with men who are trying to form a better relationship with themselves so they
Yeah.
can offer that to their wives. And I have several who, in correlation with the one on one work, go out and
Yeah.
purchase your course. And I will say there's so much value there. And I am finding these men really making progress in self confrontation, which we'll get
Yeah.
into hopefully in a
Yeah.
few minutes. But I
Wonderful.
just want to say thank you for that. And gosh, I'm trying not to jump into what you just said about desire, but I'm going to
Yeah.
super
Sure.
fast, right? Like
Sure.
so many men come in and they think wanting is desire.
That's
But
right.
when we dive into it, they're so afraid of desire and so used to wanting.
That's
And to
right.
just tease those apart and separate those, man,
Yes.
it's mind blowing how we can really evolve when we understand just the difference in those 2 things, don't you think?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. It's sort of shocking to people. I think sometimes I was just working with someone recently who's always been the higher wanter for sex. Okay, so he's
Yeah, yeah,
often
yeah.
been the one in pursuit and seeking, and his wife has struggled more with desire and sexual response. And so the frame was always that he was the one more comfortable with sex and she was the one with issues. And so that's the meaning they kept playing out. Well, he took the men's course and then he kind of realized, I'm not very capable of love and desire. And so he started facing himself more and realizing that he didn't kiss his wife like as a way to love her, as a way to care for her. He was usually trying to get something. And she'd always struggled with orgasm. Well, the short story is that as he started to change that, and she could feel it immediately, and it started to feel different to her. And what's really striking is that she started to orgasm readily now when he started changing what he was doing. But what's also interesting is he felt way more insecure. He felt way more exposed now that she was more responsive. He felt more, he couldn't kind of hide in the I'm stronger and patient, waiting for you to get your act together. And he
Yeah.
started to realize I'm really not as capable of intimacy and connection as I thought. I was hiding in this position of being the stronger one. And it actually made him more overwhelmed. And she was freed up because they had sort of moved out of this. But now that he was in this position, he of being same as with her, it then allowed him to start building the right muscle, not this sort of artificial strength.
Oh my gosh, I love that. So when you said that, I had a flash to myself. That sort of
Mm,
happened in my marriage too. For me, though,
mm.
I thought I was emotionally
Yes,
more willing to connect and emotionally stronger.
yes,
I have a little, maybe a little bit more masculine energy than some
yeah,
women. So when I found out, like, oh, I'm willing to connect in the way that feels strong to me, but not in the way that feels
right,
vulnerable to me, and I was actually
exactly,
sabotaging what I was begging for. Oh my
exactly.
gosh, it flipped
Yeah,
me
yeah,
like for a loop myself, and then my
yes,
marriage too when I had to respond to that, or when I chose to respond to
yeah,
that.
right. It's so true. It's such a, we're so good at telling ourselves stories about what's real, and it can
Yes.
feel very real, but we actually are sabotaging something without realizing it. And usually when our marriage really grows, it often means, even if you're the higher desire person for something, it means that you actually go through a frightening transformation
Yes.
where something then gets freed up and more possible between you. Hmm.
I think that's a perfect segue into who we're talking to today, but I want to say really fast. Sometimes we think when we start to do this work and we feel this high anxiety, especially as the partner who's like, no, I'm secure in this and I'm asking you to change. And then we start to feel really anxious. Sometimes, if we're not careful, we'll be like, whoa, this is wrong.
Yeah,
This is not where I want to go. I just want to offer to those who are listening, if you for a time feel a little bit higher anxiety as things shift,
yeah,
probably means you're on the right path. It
yes,
probably
it does.
means things are shaking loose in the way that you actually want
Hmm.
long
Hmm.
term. Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's dive into who we're talking to. I work with a lot of overachieving men and women who have some masculine energy, and I'm a lot like that myself, which is why this resonates to me,
Mm.
who are used to getting an idea or having a goal and just working harder and crushing it. They
Yeah,
often will have accolades or a big bank account or like people who are constantly propping them
yeah,
up, right?
yes. Hmm.
It sounds lovely and beautiful, like all their dreams are coming true. And people look at them externally and say, oh, what a beautiful life you have.
Hmm.
Then they come to us, and I know you know them too, and
Hmm.
they say, I'm just miserable. My relationship
Yeah,
isn't working. I never feel desired or appreciated for what I do. I don't know how to make this connection. Why
yeah,
doesn't she want me and love me? Right. So the same
yes.
skill set that often, we're not going to put a blanket on this, they're
Yeah, yeah.
exlier or external outliers, but the same skill set that often allows some of us to achieve in our
Mm,
career
mm.
will often sabotage relationships. And it's tricky because it works in one area and we're oblivious and blind to why it isn't working in the other. So, do you
Mhm.
want to speak to just that dynamic for a moment before we
Yeah,
dive all the way in?
yeah. Um, let's see, where would I start? I mean, first of all, it's an adaptive response to life, often,
Hmm.
to want to go out and to solve and create and do. It's an antidepressant of sorts because there's this sense of efficacy, like I can shape the world that I live in, I can impact the world that I live in. It's a good thing. There are many ways to shape the world. There are many ways to act in the world. It doesn't have to be in these grand kind of, change the world ways. But that sense of being able to affect reality and affect your life is positive. Where it can become a life lie, like where it can become a distortion, is in the frame of I need to earn my value. I need to be needed. I need to see myself as strong
Hmm.
or stronger than. And that if there's some sense that you are earning it, or you are proving that you are not just one of the little people, right? And it's got this, you've got a need to feel better than, that's where it's going to come and get you. Okay, so the reason is because, a lot of people that are high desire, a lot of people that are overachievers are often the high desire people. It can be a function of masculine energy, but I think it's often more this feeling that I'm strong, I'm able, I'm doing, where's the appreciation, right? There's a covert contract often in that idea that I should be admired and desired for what I do. And that's often the lie that they have imagined they will solve or answer by being an overfunctioner. So a lot of times this person is grown up in their family and they saw dysfunction or problems. And so they're trying to be the good child, be the heroic one, be the solver. And they might get validation from their parents for that. They often do. They get often validation from teachers and coaches and, what a great kid. And so then there's this idea that they'll often go and marry somebody who tends to need them because they know how to be needed and they need to feel special. It's almost like a way of getting around, does this person actually choose me, or do they need me? Well, when we're all insecure like we are, we usually are looking for someone to need us on some level because we are afraid that if they didn't need us, they wouldn't choose us. We're scared of people that matter to us actually knowing us and having a real choice. So it's like our attempt at a loophole in the vulnerability of love and desire. But it sets us up to never be desired if we do that, because you go in and when somebody needs you, or you operate in a way that they feel less than you, then that's very hard for them to desire you, even if they accommodate you sexually.
Beautiful. Okay, so can I unpack this and you
Yes.
correct me if I'm
Mhm,
wrong? I want to just kind of summarize in very simple terms here.
mhm,
You
mhm.
said the word antidepressant, and I'm going to say what I think it
Yeah,
means, and I would love for you to correct me.
sure.
So, when we have this false sense of self, right? Like people
Mm,
are propping us up to make us feel better. We get these accolades, or we earn this money, or we drive a nice car. It
mm,
lasts for a short amount of time, right? And it
mm,
feels
mhm,
good momentarily,
mhm.
but then we go home and the relationship maybe isn't exactly like we
Yeah,
want or whatever. So then we'll
yeah.
achieve more and we'll get that little hit, that dopamine hit or that
Mhm,
those pleasure feel good hormones. And so we're like managing our
mhm.
mood with the
Yeah.
external validation. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying with
right.
antidepressant?
So what I mean by antidepressant is to feel like you can actually affect the world is the antidepressant, not necessarily the validation you're talking about. The validation
Okay.
does feel good in the moment, but ultimately people that are building a life around that life lie are often bound to have a big depressive awakening. That is that they've had their ladder on the wrong wall. They've been trying to get something that life isn't going to give to them. So they may well encounter a kind of depressive awakening. What I mean, just in the most concrete sense, is when we feel like we can affect our reality, it is an antidepressant. So rats get depressed if they can't stop themselves from getting shocked, like ants, the rats that are getting shocked, but if they learn that they press a certain lever and it stops, they actually are okay. But if a rat, these are just coming back to these basic scientific studies that psychologists have done, can't do anything about it, they'll literally curl up in a ball and get depressed in a rat sort of way. Okay. And human beings are the same. If you feel like you're a small force and the world is acting upon you and you can't do anything about it, that is a depressing meaning. So there's nothing wrong with wanting to affect your reality, whether it's even just like, I don't feel good when I go run or exercise, I feel better. Even just knowing there's something you can do will make you less likely to get depressed. So
Mm,
that's a good thing, right? The problem is when invest in this idea that I can control everything. I can make people love me. I can make people need me. I'm going to get this, I'm going to earn this validation and earn my worth and kind of prove to myself and everybody else that I'm better than most normal human beings. Well, then we're setting up a meaning that is not, we can't actually do that. The things that matter most in life, we actually don't have much control over. I mean, we can control on some level our desirability based on who we are, but we don't control whether or not someone desires us. We can control our lovability, but we don't control whether or not we are loved. And so,
Totally.
right, these are choices that belong to others, and the more we're trying to control them into reality, the more we will on some level confront our powerlessness. And being able to deal with powerlessness well is a fundamental part of being happy.
Thank you for clarifying that. So in some ways it becomes the problem when it that false sense of control comes in,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Yeah,
Right.
when we think we can control the desire of our spouse.
Hmm.
We can control things that really aren't ours to
Yes,
even try.
that's right.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Beautiful. Thank you for clarifying that. So that comes in, we're starting to really push for that false sense of control. We start to earn our value in some ways. I heard you say that. And then I want to zone in or zoom in on this needed versus chosen thing. I
Yeah.
can't tell you how many times this comes up, right? Like
Oh,
we're
yeah.
so afraid of the person we love not needing us. And of
Yeah.
course, we know when we think about this intellectually, the only way we can be chosen, which is that underlying craving, is
Yes.
to not be needed. But can you say more about how you see that show up and maybe how listeners could recognize if that's happening for them and they haven't been aware of it up until now?
Yeah. Okay. So it's a big question. Let me just think about where to start. Yeah, I think so yeah, I think we're terrified, and for good reason actually, that our fallibility, our limitations, just the fact that we're just like ultimately underneath it all, just flawed, vulnerable human beings. That's who we all really are. That we are, if we really let someone see us, really let someone know us, that they'll be like, I could do better. Okay.
Yes.
And because we're so terrified of that, and because we have a hard time ourselves accepting ourselves as flawed, limited human beings, we instinctively want to keep somebody from really knowing who we are. So it's just easy. And then I think beyond that, I think men and women in a different way, but given that you work with men a lot, I think men are often given the idea that the way to be a man is to be stronger than the woman, to have her need you, to find a damsel in distress, because then she's just going to think like, he's answered all of my life questions. I'll never ever leave him. And so it's a fantasy when you're watching, Disney. It's like the prince, right? It comes in and he solves her life and he gives her a life and a castle, and she's just so adoring and grateful. So it's a nice fantasy. I can understand why we want it in a way, but it doesn't end up working, and it ultimately makes love, when you get it, feel like it's transactional.
Hmm.
So, but remind me, Rhonda, of your question. You're saying, how do you start to see it, and what do you do when you see it, or to help me so I don't just.
Yes, I want to say really fast about the Disney. I had a
Yeah.
friend who said Disney movies and rom-coms in general are just emotional porn, right? They're giving us a false sense of what this is
Yes.
really like.
Yes.
So I thought that was hilarious and
It's true.
reminded me.
It's like the parentified romance. It's like, who doesn't want somebody who sweeps in and adores you and tells you you're amazing just as you are? Duh, like who doesn't want that? It feels good. It captures our narcissistic desire, but it isn't real life. It isn't real romance. It isn't marriage. So yes, it's definitely a kind of porn.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so the question, let's just make it really simple. Like, how might one identify if they're in a situation like that where this, like, maybe under the radar feeling of just wanting to be needed? How would somebody say, oh, yeah, that's me? Are there any telltale signs that we could look
Well,
for?
yeah, just any place where you feel, let me see, how would I say it so you can see it? Did you carry a secret fantasy when you were dating your spouse that she or he would need you? And what did that kind of allow you to get away from? I think a lot of people, if they look at that question, will recognize they had some fantasy of how they were going to solve something for the other person. And why didn't you date or pursue someone that you thought maybe seemed stronger? Okay. Now, not that those people necessarily were stronger, but maybe you perceived they were stronger. And what made you be anxious about desiring that person, right? So those are questions. Where is it that you resent in your marriage? That's the question I would ask. Like, and why are you resenting? Oftentimes, it's this feeling like you're doing all these things that you're not being appreciated for. And but if you look honestly at yourself, you may find that you actually gravitate to doing these things that you feel should earn you accolades on some level, that you are trying to demonstrate to yourself and others that you are necessary, that you are important. It's not because, sometimes it's because there's just pure negligence and it really won't happen unless you do it. But oftentimes we've been complicit in those kinds of meanings of finding these niches in the relationship where you can feel needed. And so it's important to both see that you're participating in that needing to be needed and what is it solving, quote unquote, but also where does it create resistance and resentment in your partner, even if they're also collusive in it, right?
Mhm.
So I know plenty of people that will marry somebody that they think is stronger than them, and the person who acts stronger is happy to be seen that way. But then the person who feels weaker has a really hard time, even though they want the benefits of being with the stronger one, they don't want to actually open-heartedly care for that person because they're afraid, they don't want to, how to say it, they are afraid that their insufficiency will be too exposed, and also they're afraid that that person will have even more ego and more superiority, so they withhold as a way of trying to get the other person down a peg.
Oh, that's good. So I would love to transition into that piece, what it's like to be married to this person we're talking about. But before we do that, thank you for your questions. And I'll just add one more. I think it could
Sure.
be valuable to say, if I knew that my spouse did not need me at all, like if we were going to drop that today, what am I
Yeah.
afraid might happen?
Oh,
What
that's
am I
good.
afraid of if we drop
Yeah.
all need?
Yes. Yeah, good. Excellent.
Okay, so let's go into where you were headed with what it's like on the other side of this to have this spouse who perhaps is overachieving, constantly accomplishing. I often work with clients who will say, I don't want to be average. I want to be way better than average. In fact, it's almost like an insult to think that I would be, quote, normal, right?
Yeah.
What might it be like as a spouse of somebody who sees life this way and sees their ability to earn value this way?
Yeah, so there's nothing wrong with excellence. I mean, so I just want to be clear about that. There's nothing wrong with becoming really skilled at whatever your craft is or whatever it is you do. The world's better for having competent people. So the issue is not competency. The issue is being better than. Oh, that is to say, an investment in feeling superior to other people. That's a problem. And there's a difference between feeling superior to others and being superior in your competency. Okay. So strong people do not need to feel, they don't need a weak person under them to feel strong. Do you see?
Mm,
Strength is capacity. The more the world has capacity, the better off we are.
yeah.
When you need to be better than, that's actually weak.
Yeah.
Does
Would
that
you
make
say that feeds into that false sense of self then, right? I love what you said. Being very confident is beautiful. We're
Yeah,
so grateful for these people who are accomplishing and making the world better through their efficiency and competency. But
right.
would you say the trouble is that false sense of self when we have to be better than, when we have to prove and I'll let you
Yes.
say more to that.
Right, exactly. It's the competitive part of us, it's the needy part of us, it's the part of us that wants to use other people to manage our own feelings about who we are. So
Mhm.
that is, you get invested in seeing somebody as under you or less than you. Now, that doesn't go well in marriage, right? If you are competing on some level with your spouse, or your need for your spouse to see you as superior, that's when you're going to run into trouble, because they're going to resist you. They're going to make you pay for that. That is an untrustworthy part of you if you're invested in being needed, superior, more able, stronger, wiser, whatever. That's going to create trouble, because you can't be honest, and you can't also honor genuinely and respect the strength, capacity, and autonomy of your spouse when you need them to need you. So it sets up a hierarchy of vertical relationship in marriage that doesn't work. Relationships work, intimate relationships, if they're going to actually be intimate and choice based, have to be same as.
Mm.
Traditional marriage is hierarchical. She needs you. Now, I don't mean you can't do traditional roles. I'm not talking about what you're actually doing, but the idea that she needs you. Okay. Cinderella and the prince, it's a vertical relationship. Now, there's the fantasy that both are going to get their ego needs met in that. That's why they like the idea. Sure, I'll adore a prince forever. Just give me a castle and get me out of hell, and I'll be very happy with you. Okay, it just doesn't work. After the honeymoon, it starts to break down, because you're relying on the other person to give you a sense of self, and their limited self is not able to manage even their own sense of themselves. So you're both looking to each other to manage who you are, and it ends up falling apart. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's that hierarchy that's a limitation. When we're weak and young in our development, we create vertical relationships of value, not of capacity. That's okay, but value, where intimate relationships are horizontal in value.
Yes. I'm going to just repeat what I think you're saying in a less clinical way,
Yeah.
but what I see, which is beautiful. Keep talking the way you talk. I love it. Um, but what I see a lot is the things that attract us to each other initially might also be the things that we really don't like later, right? Like, oh, you're so
Absolutely.
powerful and you're so wonderful, and oh, you're so cute and I can care for you and hold you, and
Yeah.
then later neither of us are finding that attractive anymore. We're
Yes.
like, could you please just see who I am and value
Yes.
me? And we're like, could
Exactly.
you please just hold your own so I don't have to cater to everything and
That's
show
right.
me that desire, right? Like, we just, it's
Yes.
not attractive on either side for most of us.
That's right. So in the dating phase or the early relationship phase, we actually see our spouse's difference as something that expands us. Like, I admire this part of them, or to find acceptance with this person. Like, my husband's more introverted. My dad was very introverted. It bothered me that my dad was so introverted. It was hard to get his validation. But then when I met my husband, that was compelling, because getting his validation felt like an expansion of me, right? But then we got married and we were a few years in, and he's like, I'm like, what did you think about this? And he's like, oh, it's good. Like, very like, and then I'm like, why are you so, like, unable to tell me whatever. And so then it was no longer, it felt like it hurt, and it hurt more than just, the average person not validating something in you. So it often, what is compelling in the dating phase becomes acutely painful often in the married phase. And then we start trying to change each other to solve it. Mhm.
I want to repeat that. What is compelling in the dating phase often becomes acutely painful in the marriage phase.
That's
And
right.
that's so tricky though, right? Like, people are going to be listening to this being like, well, then what are we supposed to do?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Right.
it's so true.
Right. Well, and nothing's going wrong. How to say it? The only thing that's happening is our fantasy about what marriage is going to be is breaking on the rocks of reality.
As it should, though,
As
right?
it should. So the only
Yeah.
thing that's happening is our fantasy is falling apart. And we have to wake up to what marriage is. Most of us get married to secure and lock someone into loving us much more than we're thinking about a promise to love another flawed person that we barely know when we're getting married, right?
Yes.
But that's what marriage is. It's like, can I actually care for this person who's more introverted, who's not going to validate me whenever I want it? That not because he was withholding, but just because of who he genuinely was and how he operated in the world. So, can I actually care for a person that doesn't just exist to prop up my sense of self? Well, that's harder. I don't like that as much.
So much harder. Can we interject a question here? I
Sure.
remember being asked this question and I was like, oh gosh, I don't even know. But let's pretend that we have to say what we love about our spouse that has nothing to do with our personal gain. Like it's
Mhm.
just about them. I remember
Yeah.
thinking about this question and
Yeah.
everything was like, well, he loves me so well and
Yeah,
he
he
takes
does.
care of this or that. Nope,
Yes.
wait. We can only talk about what we love about them that's not
Just
propping up
as a
the other person.
unique human being. Right.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
Absolutely. No,
I
it's
think
true.
all listeners should maybe just pause at some point today and ask themselves,
Right.
what do I choose and love about my partner
Yes.
that
What do
it's
I
about them?
respect and admire about the way that they are in the world, the way that they think, the way that they do things, that is not about how it impacts me? It's a great question. It's a great way of
Mm,
thinking. Hmm.
beautiful. Okay, so you said before we did this, like that's just, or before we pause for the question, like that's really more about marriage. So let's talk a little bit about how, when we're unaware, because that's where most people find me. And I'm guessing a lot of people start to create a tiny bit of awareness and come to you for your course or from some of your other services. Like when we're creating that awareness, or maybe not aware at all yet, what happens in a marriage in this dynamic if we sort of just let that fly under the radar and be like an undercurrent to
Yeah.
the marriage?
So I just want to make sure, Ron, I'm following. You're saying what happens if this needing to be needed piece doesn't get addressed? Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Right. If we
Yeah.
both start functioning, or the over functioner keeps over functioning
Yeah.
and the under functioner keeps feeling like not appreciated and also
Okay.
afraid.
Resentment obliterates all affection. That's what happens.
Oh, say
Because
more.
both sides start to resent so deeply. You think you're better than me. You don't love me. You don't desire me. You just want me to prop up your sense of self and make you think you're God's gift to humanity. And you just demand that. And you go around, you like the people at work better because they don't mind propping up your ego, but I know you better and you're not that nice and you're not that nice to me. And no, I'm not going to make you feel that way. So there's that one down resentment. And then the one up resentment is I work my butt off. I give you so much. Your life is so much better because of all the hard work. And then you just sit around saying you're not loved enough or whatever enough. And your self esteem issues are not my problem. They're your problem. And why can't you get your act together? And when are you going to start claiming your life and stop looking to me to solve your sense of self? And the tricky thing is that both people are right.
Well, say more about that because I think you're right when you say both are right. Like it's true
Yeah,
and it's so
right.
painful when we're both right.
Exactly. Both people are right. They are seeing the liabilities of the other person. But the problem is they're so fixated on the other person, which is the part they can't control. And by keeping their focus on the other person, they keep the marriage operating in that resentment based frame. All my courses, all my work is always about turning that lens back onto yourself. What would it be like being married to me? Where is my spouse right about me in all of her resentment or his resentment? Where am I immature? Now, it doesn't mean that you're wrong about them. Okay. So, lest you think you have to pretend you don't see where they're wrong or where they're off. That's true. It's just that you not looking at yourself keeps them justified. I don't
Mhm.
mean truly justified. I just mean in the defensive justification, right? You think I'm a jerk. Well, okay. But that's also because you have such low self esteem and you're not dealing with your life and you just sit around resenting me rather than getting out and doing something. Okay. Well, So they're kind of right about that. But on the other hand, what they don't see is that they keep using that liability in their one down spouse to keep pushing themselves up against her or him. And that keeps this struggle going on for eternity.
Yes. Can we bring up two terms? And I know that we could talk about Bowen theory and Snarsh's wording, but I'd love to hear Finlayson-Fife's wording. Differentiation, because I
Mm.
think you're talking about it and we're not really saying the word, and
Yeah,
then self-confrontation, which
sure.
confrontation has a little bit of a negative
Yeah, yeah,
association with it, but it's not, in my
yeah,
opinion.
yeah.
So let's talk about those two words and
Okay, good.
differentiation or
So
self-confronting.
yeah,
Either
so
one.
differentiation, I'll just talk about differentiation in lay terms is emotional maturity. Maybe that's not lay term enough. What it is our ability to handle our sense of who we are without having to extract that sense from other people. And when we are early in our development, the thing is that human beings learn how to have a sense of self while they're in relationships. So we start out with a sense of self residing in our parents, okay, or our peers. They are the ones that are telling us about who we are. Progression, development is to be able to take that sense of self not just from what everyone's reflecting back to you, but to start to develop a sense of who you are that can operate more within you and not be dependent on other people managing it, propping it up, reassuring you, telling you you're okay. You get more able as you mature to hold your sense of who you are, even if you're not getting that immediate feedback, validation, or feeling from people around you. So that is the progression, and self-confrontation is a key part of it, which I'll say in a minute. But you can't actually love and desire someone until you've moved out of a dependency on other people to manage your sense of self. Now, a lot of people will be like, what? I'm fully dependent and I love people. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what I mean is, it's not just like one moment, but if you need someone to tell you you are okay, this is back to your point, Rhonda, where you're saying, like, can you value someone like independent of how they impact you? Can you value and appreciate someone because of simply who they are, or does it always come back to how it impacts you? That's really the beginning of love, is to say, I value you because you exist, because you're a human being, because you matter, and I can see that, not because I need it in some way or I need it for managing me. Because if it's always about managing ourselves, well, it's a form of use of each other. Even if it's mutually beneficial or feels good to two people, it is a kind of use, not really love. Love and desire, not want, are born out of having real choice and saying, I value you, I choose you, I respect you, I give you my acknowledgement as another human being, not because I need something from you, but that I'm honest enough to care about you just as another part of divinity walking around on this planet. So that's when we grow out of that dependency, that's when we really become more capable of love and desire. It's what we all want from each other. We want to be loved for who we are. We want to be desired as an expression of respect and love. But to be able to give that is much harder. And
It's the
so,
hardest thing I've ever
yeah,
done in my life, and I
yeah,
don't think we'll ever, quote, "get there" until we're,
yeah,
like, perfected at it.
yeah,
But if we could, like, zoom way out in the problems of the world and marriages and all the
yeah,
things, I feel like if people understood and were able to practice a percentage of
yes,
differentiation, it
yes.
would change
It would change
so much.
everything. Change everything. Because it comes back to this question of, so self-confrontation is a Schnarch term,
Mhm.
who teaches differentiation theory. But what that is basically the ability to look honestly at yourself and to hold your own behavior up against your honest moral positions, right?
Okay, say
So,
that more layman because I
okay,
I love where you're going, and let's just
okay, I'll try. I'm not
I'll
very
keep
good at this.
asking questions if that's okay.
Good. No, Des, please do. I taught a lesson yesterday about David and Bathsheba, right? At church. And there was this moment of self-confrontation when prophet Nathan comes to David, who has been lying to himself and trying to cover up the impact of his self-serving behavior. And Nathan, the prophet Nathan, tells David a story about another person who takes advantage, right? Well, David's response, he's hearing that story and he's putting it, he is holding it up to his internal sense of right and wrong, his honest sense of right and wrong. And he's like, well, that's a terrible person that would do that. That whoever that story is deserves to die. That's what he says, right? Very compassionate response. But he's like, basically that's the, wrong. Okay, well then of course the prophet says, well, you are the man, you are this person. Okay, so then of course then David recognizes that he sees himself honestly and he's holding it up against his own moral position, which is that's unacceptable behavior. Then he goes into a crisis of self, as he should. That's what it is to self-confront, to not to a lot of us would not accept our own behavior were someone else doing it.
Oh my
Never. We'd
gosh,
be like,
yes.
what a jerk. It's so self-serving. I mean, right? So we have an honest moral compass, but we have a hard time putting that onto ourselves because we tell ourselves lies. We tell ourselves stories about why our behavior is acceptable or how it's good or how it's kinder than it really is. And so this beam in our eye, the scriptural reference, that we're literally blind to ourselves and our impact and how we are trying to get things from others much more than we're giving, or that we're being heroic because we're trying to earn or get something, not because we really simply love. So we're so busy proving we're better than that we actually are very, very weak when we need to do that. People that are
Mm,
strong don't need to actually prove their strength all the time. They just live it. Mhm.
totally. Okay, so question time again. I'm going to use what you said. It
Yeah,
would be awesome if we all just stopped and asked ourselves, what behavior am I repeating or am I continuing in the relationship that I would not appreciate if my
exactly.
partner were doing the same?
Exactly. That's
And be so honest about that.
yes, exactly. So the question I sometimes will ask people is like, what would it be like being married to me? Get into my spouse's shoes, and where are the places where I'd be like, oh, what a drag. What a drag. Like I would not like that. Here's another way I ask my clients to do it is to think about, let's say you're the female in the relationship, right? Like if my if my son were to marry a woman like me, would I like my daughter-in-law? Okay. Or if my daughter were to partner with a husband like I am, would I like my son-in-law? Okay. You're just getting it away from you. Now I do this with clients sometimes who are telling me all the justifications, and then when I put it like that, they're like, I hate him. No.
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
Because we can suddenly see it and we see the self-service in it. We see like, oh, she's just being a martyr. She doesn't really love, or he's a jerk and he just serves his own interests. And so sometimes we just need to get it into the frame that we can actually see it because it is eroding our self-respect. The thing is, we can't actually hide from our moral compass. I mean, we can tell ourselves stories that can allow us to not face it, but it's still eroding our self-respect and our sense of freedom internally if we're a house divided.
Yes, that's so true. Another way I like to do it, if there's like a big decision, like, oh, my wife thinks I should handle this circumstance this way, but I don't really want to because X, Y, and Z. And they have all the quote right answers or strong
Yes.
answers. And I'll say, let's just imagine for a moment that you are your wife. And not only do you hear what you're saying to her, but you know the thoughts, right? Like if you can self confront and get really clear about your thoughts and intentions about how
Mm.
much you value your wife's opinion or how much you respect her stance or position on this. And a lot of times they're like kind of embarrassed. They'll even
Yeah,
say,
absolutely.
well, don't judge me, but if you knew the whole story, this, right? So I
Yeah.
like them to just get super honest, not just about
Yeah.
what they're saying or how they're presenting to their spouse, but how they're thinking and
Yeah.
trying to put a mask on their thinking, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. We do so much of that in our intimate relationships. We are trying to keep them from being too intimate because we don't want to expose our less than um worthy thoughts and our less than worthy desires. And we're using lots of good arguments often to deflect and get our spouse's attention elsewhere, but not actually face who we are. And marriage is designed to expose this to ourselves, I think. So often the disillusionment is, oh, marriage isn't what I had imagined or hoped it was, which is one big validation chamber. Okay. And instead, it's this thing that's actually asking me to deal with who I am and to look honestly at who I am and my impact on another person that I have promised God or the highest in myself to love. And I'm not doing a great job when I'm asking them to revolve around my ego. Mm-hmm.
Totally. I love what you said. We want marriage to be a validation chamber. Just come pet my hair
Yeah,
and tell me how pretty
tell me
I
I'm
am and
great.
prop me up. But what it actually does, it holds up a mirror and says, here's where you still need to grow and heal. And
Yeah.
dang, it hurts to grow and heal,
It does. It
right?
does. It does. And but you know what? Is the more you do, the more your spouse genuinely validates you. That's the thing. This is something Dr. Schnarch would always say, which is the more you need validation to manage your sense of self, the less likely you are to get it. But the less you need it, the more able you are to get it because you're being kind, you're being fair, you're being decent. Like sometimes I've been really honest with my spouse and just said, you know what? I'm seeing that I've been doing this. I'm sorry I do this. I know that's hard. I know that's difficult. I'm sorry I'm such a loser this way. And it's sincere. Like I'm facing myself more. I know my negative impact. Well, the thing is, it seldom turns into like, yeah, I mean, yeah, you're totally
Yeah.
because I'm married to a good person. I mean, he never does that. But I think, what often happens is that it's a track that this person cares about me. She or he is willing to look at themselves and deal with themselves. It makes you easier to love. It makes you easier to get close to. You are more trustworthy because you will be honest with who you are. So the paradox is the more that we face ourselves, this is exactly how I help couples become closer, is I help them develop who they actually are so they can be honest and actually have intimacy and validation that's just genuine, not false or pretended.
Oh, I love that. I wanted to say a quick thing on the opposite end of that because we're saying, like, oh, yeah, the more that you don't need the validation, the more that you get that. And I would also say, when you're seeking for it and you're begging for it, just
Mhm.
the other person, they don't have the chance. We said this before, to offer it genuinely, to
Mhm.
offer it freely.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then it's just that perpetuating cycle, right? And then you don't feel validated, and then you seek it more. Like, if we can just call out that cycle that
Right.
you're just perpetuating what's really hurting,
Yes,
what's
exactly
re
right. Right, when you're
really
trying
painful.
so hard to get it, and then somebody I remember like "Do you think I'm pretty? Do you think," and then John's like, "Well, yes, I do," I'm like and then it's like, "Well, it doesn't even feel real, now you just said it,
Yes,
did you?"
totally. I think you should apologize. Okay, I'm sorry.
It's
No.
like, "Oh, no, you just said it." Yeah. So exactly. So it interferes often our desire to get it interferes with what's natural emerging and keeping our focus where it needs to be, which is on who we are. And are we at peace with who we are? Are we okay with who we are? It doesn't mean you can't address issues in the marriage, of course, or name things that are difficult, because honesty with ourselves and our spouse is really fundamental to a marriage growing. It needs truth in order to grow. So it doesn't mean you can't name problems, of course, but you just don't want the distortion that keeps it only on your partner. And as soon as they get it solved, you'll be okay. That is to basically create a power struggle that will keep you from solving anything.
Thank you for sharing that. One last thing, and I hope we have time to move on to that want versus desire to dive into that just for
Uh-huh.
a few moments.
Yeah.
But there have been times in my marriage where, as I'm saying something to my husband, I will know in my head, like, oh, if he wanted to, he could come back and say this, or oh, if he was like emotionally savvy or whatever the word, he could come back and drill me. But I will present the argument in a way that feels very powerful to me. And I'll present it in a way that I'm trying to leave him no room to
Mm.
see my flaws. And that feels really powerful in the moment. And it also leaves me really weak not being honest with myself,
Mhm.
not being honest with
Yeah.
him. It's the opposite of what you said. I've also experienced the opposite too when we come in and say, "You know what? I'm really sorry." And even
Mhm.
if you don't notice this in me,
Oh,
I
yeah.
am starting to notice this in me, and I just want to share this with you that I'm working
Yes.
on it, or if you see me doing it, this is what's
Yes.
happening.
Good.
But
Yeah.
the one up
Yeah.
position, we can really take that and distort it to our benefit.
Yes.
And I think we get really good at it
Oh,
sometimes,
yes.
unfortunately.
Socially sophisticated people can be
Yeah.
very good at twisting reality into the shape or putting it on turf they can win on, or
Yes.
making it look like you're trying while really you're manipulating something to keep yourself from being confronted or looking at the parts of yourself you don't want to deal with.
I
The
used
thing
to be
is,
the queen of that. Make it look
yeah,
like I'm trying while I'm
yeah,
distorting and twisting. If
yep,
you've done this is going to resonate with you. If you're like, what does that even mean? Don't worry about it.
yeah,
But oh my gosh, that really
yes.
resonates with me. I did it all the time.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And the thing is your spouse, if you're doing that, your spouse may not be able to name it because they maybe aren't sophisticated enough to name it, or maybe they don't want to see you that way, but they feel it. They know
Yes.
it. They know you're not trustworthy. So their natural instinct is to guard themselves from you. So whether or not it's named or conscious, it's living in the marriage and it's corrupting the marriage. And
Mhm.
so the more honestly we deal with ourselves, we don't get away with anything in marriage. Like any fantasy of that, you pay the price for your liabilities always. So the more you clean them up, the more freely you'll live your life, the more happily you'll live your life.
We
Yeah.
don't get away with anything in the marriage, you guys. I'm just going to repeat that. You do pay for your liabilities, even if you're distorting and you're pretending to put on this
Yeah.
mask for the greater good. If it
Yes.
is under false pretense, you don't get away with it.
That's right.
I just think we cannot overstate that because I lived in a space for a long time where it felt so strong and it was almost like addictive to be in that strong
Yes.
place.
Yes.
And I was miserable in the fact that I was desiring this connection that I
Yes.
thought he wasn't offering, but
Yes.
actually I was sabotaging and I could not see it. So,
Yes.
those
100%.
of you who feel that way in your marriage,
Yes.
please listen and
Yeah.
just confront yourself. How are you sabotaging what you want? This doesn't apply to everybody, by the way, but I think those
Yeah.
who resonate with this will know if it's them.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I don't know, I always think of like the Scrooge and stuff. He kind of thinks he's manipulated a reality in which he's going to dominate, prevail, and win, but he has no friends. Like he has no warmth. He has no. So it's like you don't get away with it. How do you get away with it when you sabotage this? I was thinking today, I was talking to my husband this morning, like I've enjoyed a lot of wonderful things in my life through my career, and all those things matter so much to me. But if I had to only have one thing, it would be my relationship with my husband. Like that has been the most precious thing in my life because I have a true friend and it's so priceless. And so when we are working against it to manage our egos, we pay a massive price, because I think friendship is ultimately all we really have is our relationships. I mean, I think that's when we really despair, is when we don't have a real sense of being known and cared for. And so everything we can do to become someone capable of real friendship, capable of honest connection, we deeply, deeply bless our lives.
Mm, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm.
Okay, to wrap up, and we can spend just a few minutes if you have that, and if not, you let me know. But I wanted to go back to where we started. So I mostly work with emotional intimacy these days, which of course is a foundational piece of physical intimacy. We can't really separate those.
Mm.
But want versus desire, and
Mm.
you talked about defining those differently, which I totally agree with. And what I
Mhm.
see is a lot of men who want, right? They want, and
Mhm.
that feels strong, like you said, but they will shut down their desire because they're so afraid of the rejection. They're so afraid of like true desire, because it's so
Yeah.
vulnerable and
Yes.
it's so scary to them. So I would love to hear you like pull apart want versus desire and what
Hmm.
feels important as we wrap up today with emotional
Yeah.
intimacy and physical intimacy, all of it.
Yeah. Good. Well, so first of all, in my men's course, I talk about it more in terms of higher desires versus lower desires, or
Okay.
desire that comes from the lesser part of us. But my husband is the one who was saying to me, wanting I like his term better, because we were just thinking through it once, and he was saying that want is the absence. And so if you have a want for food, right? You're trying to fill a hole, you're trying to manage something that's empty in you. So it's the lack, where desire is coming from a place of abundance that you want to create, right? To fulfill, to move towards something, but it's not about trying to fill something that is lacking. So I think that really captures the difference, because when we are wanting our partner's validation, sexual or emotional, we're saying, I feel insufficient. I feel empty. I feel a lack about who I am, and I want you to solve it. The way we will touch them or talk to them is going to be very different than being in a place of desire. And I'll explain desire in a minute, because that's for some people like, is that even real? Like, what is that? Okay.
Yeah.
Because they're like, I only know about wanting, right? So, but a lot of times we confuse this wanting with something strong or good, when really it's about ego reinforcement. So we are wanting to talk about our feelings, but what we are doing is we want reassurance. We want this person to help manage our anxieties or our fears in the world. We want them to tell us we are enough, but we're using them to solve us. And we have so much framing of this, like that marriage partnerships are basically about needing each other. That's the frame of want, not of desire. So we marry like, baby, I need you, need, all the songs are about needing each other. Okay. Those are about a kind of mutual use of each other, but it's not about desiring. Desiring is coming from a place of, I am okay, but I choose you. I care about you. I value you. You mean a great deal to me as another person. You are my friend. I Who you are and what matters to you matters to me,
Mhm.
because I care about your happiness. I care about your well-being, not just because of how you shape or impact me, right? And you don't have to deny that that person impacts you positively, but it's not to get them to fill up your life. And I heard somebody say this the other day, and I'm trying to remember if I can capture how they said it, but they said, when you actually, trying to remember how they said it. When you desire something, you actually can choose to not do it. You don't have to have it. If it's really a desire, you have the alternative of not choosing it. Now, you may choose because there's fulfillment and richness there that you desire in your life, but it's not because you need it. And so I think that to desire someone is to say, like, I choose to care for this person. I choose to embrace and give my best in this relationship. Our children, we have on some level a choice to make. To really love our children is to say, I will bring my best to this person to facilitate their life being good, that their needs are met, that they're challenged in ways they need to be challenged, that limits are set in a way that blesses their lives. But it's an investment in a person, not because you're trying to get them to tell you you're a good parent, but because you're trying to be a good parent. That's a choice, that's a desire. It's not about needing to fulfill a sense of who you are through the child. So ask any questions to get it more understandable.
No, that was beautiful. I'll just say, like, if we could whittle this down into a nutshell, when we're wanting, it's because we are empty. We're not
Yeah.
okay. We need somebody to give us something to solve us or to fill us up. It's more of a neediness.
Yes.
And then what you said about the desire is, I'm okay just as I am. Whether
Mhm.
you give me this or not, like, of course I want it. That's
Yes.
okay. Or excuse me, of course I'd like love to have that piece of you that I value, right?
Yes.
I choose you. I care about you. I value you and I value me. And we're okay.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And, I know I got married when I was almost 30 years old and I was studying a lot of these things. So I had some advantage in both of those realities. But I remember that I kind of came up against a decision point where I was really saying, like, do I choose John? Like, because there are these things, there are these gaps, there are these places where he's different than I imagined who I would marry. Or there are places where I may feel aloneness in the marriage because of the ways that we're different from each other. And I remember thinking, I didn't really have the language for this then, but I remember really thinking about the fact that I could choose to not marry him or choose to not marry at all and still live a good life. Like, I trusted that I could have a meaningful life even if I didn't walk that path. But I remember thinking, like, I really desire to share a life with John. I really desire to have him in my life, to care about him, to be his friend. It's the one I most desire. But it wasn't because I couldn't imagine fulfillment or goodness in my life without that. And so that made it a different choice. Now, it doesn't mean that there haven't been times where I can fall certainly into want or make me feel good, or and that there hasn't been, because there has, choice points within the marriage in which it's like, am I going to really choose and care for this person as a unique person, or am I going to keep demanding that he yields to me, right? Like, so it doesn't mean that was just a one-time decision, because I think you ultimately make this choice many times in marriage if it's going to keep growing. But the important thing is it's about who we are going to be, how we are going to manage ourselves, or are we going to take from others in the name of love? That's really it. And and when you really choose someone and you know they choose you, well, that's so precious. That's so much real friendship. And there's so much beauty in it. There's so much good in it. It doesn't mean that there isn't gaps and frustrating moments or places where you have to stand and soothe yourself around the gaps, right? But you have the beauty of a real friend in your life.
I think that's a beautiful place to sort of start to wrap this up. I love what you said. It's a choice, and that's a place that we can have real connection when we're whole, and we
Mm,
can offer that to someone else who gets to
mhm.
choose when how they want to be whole, right?
Yes.
And it's okay, and more than okay, I think is what you're saying. It's very, very normal when we still feel lonely at times, when we
Yes.
still feel a gap at times.
Yes.
It doesn't mean marriage is
Definitely.
perfect. There are those times of intense connection and even
Yes.
validation, right? I don't think we're saying validation is terrible. It's
No, it's
just
not.
right.
No.
There are times of both, and that's what marriage is supposed to be.
Right. Yeah, there's absolutely nothing wrong with validation. It's a wonderful part of marriage. You just can't live your life trying to get it, because then you'll never get it. And there is no person you'll marry that's just going to reinforce every bit of you. That is not marriage. That is not love. So yes, the Cheryl Turkle, I think is her name, wrote a book. But a quote of hers is, this is a paraphrase, but something like, the greater our ability to tolerate aloneness, the less alone we will be. Right? Or if we must always be in connection, we will be very lonely. I can't remember, maybe she said it that way. So it's a paradox, but the more we can handle gaps, the more rich and solid the connection will be. Hmm.
Totally. Oh, thank you for sharing that. I like to say when we are emotionally aware and emotionally self-confronting, right, and differentiated, it's not that we're not going to feel discomfort. We
Right.
will, and we'll
Yes.
probably a lot more aware of the
Yeah.
discomfort. It's
Right.
just that we have a more solid sense of self and more confidence
Yes.
around our ability to handle that discomfort. And I think that's what you're saying,
Yes.
right?
Exactly. Exactly right.
We're
Yep.
gonna feel what we feel, we're just gonna be in a different place to handle it.
More able to regulate ourselves around it. Yes.
Totally. Thank you for being here. Is there anything that you wanna share about how people can find you or what you do? I
Sure.
mean, A quick
Sure.
Google of your name will give us lots of resources, but
Yeah, yeah.
share what
So
you'd
my
like.
sure. Well, just my website alone is a good place to start because you can see both the free podcast that I have, which is conversations like this, but then also a paid podcast called Room for Two. And what that is I'm doing real work with real couples, and you get to listen in. And so you get to hear where they're stuck, where they're in these impasses around sexual intimacy or understanding one another or finances or whatever it is. And so you're getting to hear how their stories, but my input on what it is they need to face in themselves. So a lot of people have written saying, like, this is like a really talk about getting it outside of you. And then you're like, oh crap, that's me. Okay. I do that
Yes.
thing. But then it allows you to change and address things in your marriage. And so a lot of people listen to this with their spouse, and then they can have better conversations both with themselves and with each other. So there's that. Then I have my online courses, but importantly, what I was thinking about is that we actually have a few spots left in September. We're doing an Art of Loving retreat. That's like Monday, I can't remember, like the Labor Day in the evening it starts and goes until that Friday morning. And that's in Hillsboro, Oregon, right outside of Portland. But we still have a few seats left for that. So for any men that want to go meet other awesome guys and kind of immerse themselves in this content, that's also a possibility.
Beautiful. Thank you. That sounds amazing. Thank you for your time again and being here. I so appreciate you. I know it's always a treat when we get a little bit of insight inside your mind. I love the way you present things, and
Thank you.
um, I just appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Yeah. I encourage anyone who is more interested in Finlayson-Fife's programs or what she has to offer to please reach out to her. Also, the link to find out more about me at rhondafarr.com or get on my calendar is below. Have a great day. Thanks for listening in, guys.